Hello, and welcome to another edition of Adapt2Changes Interview Series. I'm Bret Rachlin, and today I am joined by my longtime friend, Rick Fernandez. Hey, Rick.
Hey Brett, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time today, Rick. You know, I should tell everybody that perhaps nobody is more important in terms of the direction of my career than you are, Rick. If I had not, met you during college, and then moved to Atlanta, where you personally got me into technology.
Yeah.
And technology is such a relevant topic when it comes to talking about adapting to changes because, and I just did not really, never foresaw myself in technology just because I just didn't feel myself to be a very technical person. And now
Mhm.
having done this for, being the marketing communication side for over 26 years, it's just incredible to me to see all the changes. And one interesting thing to me, just from back in that time, that I think you'll find you'll appreciate is that you're one of the only people I know that had an Apple Newton back in 1994, and I think that's just an interesting place to start because when I think of adapting to changes, I think about people who are open-minded and open to trying new things. Just tell me a little bit about like what made you buy the Newton, and did you regret the purchase at all?
No, no. In fact, I wish I still had it. To be honest, I'm sure it's worth a fortune right now. You know, in every technology, as a technology marketer, one of the first things that you learn back then is the importance of early adopters. And but in order for a technology to really make it, they have to obviously go beyond that early adopter phase. And the Newton is one of the technologies that didn't make it for a while. It eventually made it once Palm announced theirs, and then they set the stage for what eventually became the iPhone and the iPad and all that stuff. But you're right. There is a need for these people that are a little bit crazy, a little bit willing to take some risk and go out on a limb for something that they believe in. And the funny thing is that I don't know how long ago the Newton came out, probably about 20 years ago. Whenever that was, I had a vision of how I wanted to use that kind of technology. Uh, and today, I use my iPad. So today I have handwritten notes on my iPad, and which is kind of the vision I had for the Newton at the time. And eventually technology catches up to that
Well,
vision, but you never
Well,
knew.
tell everybody a little bit about the Newton. And first of all, it was back in '94 when you had it, so it goes back even more than 20 years.
Hmm.
Like you said, it did predate the Palm Pilot, which I'm sure for a lot of our audience may not even know what that is. But
Yeah.
tell everybody what the Newton was and how it has evolved into what you're using from like an iPad standpoint.
Yeah, it was just a handheld device. It was a personal digital assistant, I think is what they called it back then. It was just a very small, it was bigger, it was smaller than an iPad, bigger than an iPhone, but the workable screen area was probably slightly bigger than what a large iPhone is today. And it was just a digital thing where you could write phone numbers, keep notes, keep contact information. It was ahead of its time. It was very rough. It used they call it graffiti, which is kind of their braille almost, where you had to learn how to write a certain way, and then the Newton could read it as text. But it never took off. But I don't think we'd have things like an iPad or an iPhone without something like that.
And I do recall the Palm Pilots used the graffiti as well, which was not
Yeah.
something that was not something that was easy for me to adapt. I liked poking at the letters versus trying to use the graffiti. So I'm much happier now with my iPhone and iPads and things like that. The user interface and the experience is much better.
Yeah, but think about it. If people like you and I had not invested in things like an iPhone, I mean, I'm sorry, a Newton or a Palm, we wouldn't have iPhones today. You really need those early adopters to at least prove to the Apples of the world or the Palms of the world that a market for this could exist. And then from that, they try to, jump the chasm over to to the larger audience, larger market. But if you don't have those early adopters that are willing to take the risk and deal with all the headaches and all the bugs and everything, you can't reach that larger market.
Well, and you've always been an early adopter. How has that helped you adapt to changes in your career, especially given the fact that in communications things have changed drastically since the Newton came out in terms of the number of channels that are available to communicate with your target audiences. How has being an early adopter helped you adapt to those changes?
Well, I think any good marketer is good at communicating with their market, right? And I've represented, I was on, like you, I was on the agency side for a long time and had to work with a number of companies, both large and small. And if it's a small company that is trying to establish a market, they need to be able to speak to early adopters. If it's a large company like the Apples of the world now, they have to talk to that larger, broader audience. And so, yeah, I'm definitely an early adopter for some things. I'm not an early adopter for every technology that comes out, but I do like to put myself in the position of the market and say, okay, what is going to resonate with this market or that market, whether it be an early adopter market or a broader general market.
So describe a little bit about how you've kind of stuck to or stuck with a technology, because one of the challenges about being an early adopter is you do have to overcome the obstacles, overcome some of those initial challenges. The technology can be frustrating. It's sometimes easier to think, I just need to go back to doing it the way I was doing it. How do you feel you've overcome some of those obstacles?
I think it's just a mindset. I think certain people are more predisposed to being more open to things. I'm not that open-minded across the board, right? If I buy something and it fails me and it doesn't accomplish what I need to accomplish, it'll go in the garbage can just like anything else. I don't give everything a try, but when there are technologies, I am excited by finding technologies that other people may not have found and being on the front end. I mean, I'll give you one example. I'm not an early adopter of this. I think I'm a second stage adopter, but it's still relatively new, are the robot vacuum cleaners. I recently purchased a robot vacuum cleaner and I absolutely love it, but those things have been around for years. And I waited to purchase one because the technology that they had at the time wasn't very good as far as mapping out a room and having an organized way of cleaning it. The early technology just kind of bounced around from corner to corner without really knowing where it was, and eventually just figuring out, okay, well, I've bounced around enough times that I must have covered this whole area. And that didn't really fly with me. And so now that the technology is at a separate stage where they have, some of these things have cameras at the front that can actually see things blocking them. They have LiDAR, which is a form of, I think, laser-based radar, where they can sense the corners of the room and see the corners of the room and have more of a mapped out way of, an organized way of covering the whole area. When I saw that, that's when I jumped in and said, okay, this is now reached a point where it makes sense to me.
Interesting. I want to go back to something you said, though, a minute or two ago about being predisposed to being able to kind of to deal with the struggles. And sometimes, and it's not, and you're not like that about everything. I mean, you're like that about certain things. First question, though, about that is that, do you think that's something that is innate, or is that something, can you learn to, can you learn to persevere? Can you learn that, or is that something that you think you're born with?
It's interesting. I don't know if it's something that's innate. I do think it's generational. I think our parents' generation is less willing to do that. It's funny. My brother is the way I am. My cousin is. We're all technology geeks, and we like being on the front end of technology. And we all kid around with each other that what's going to come around that is going to be alien to us. With my parents, technology got to the point where if they wanted to book a vacation to Europe, in the distant past, they would have gone to a travel agent, but now you pretty much have to do it online on a computer.
Right.
You research it on a computer, you purchase your tickets, you reserve your rooms, you reserve your car if that's what you want, tour information. It's all done on the computer. And I had to do that for them because it wasn't their nature. They hadn't grown up with this technology. One of the benefits that my brother and I had is that my parents very early on saw that we were interested in technology and exposed us to the early computers. And we had Atari computers, we had early Macs, early Apple computers, early IBM computers. And none of us studied computers, none of us studied engineering or anything like that, but we were always fascinated by it. And so when I started my career, I kind of landed in technology. And I always tell people that it was very fortunate for me. I consider myself a good marketer, but I don't think I would have done well doing PR for Coca-Cola or something like that. I have no interest in Coca-Cola or any of those general brands. I think my career has gone well because I landed in technology early, and I had a fascination for technology, I had an interest in technology, and it kind of led me to communicate with other people that were like me, and so it made it easy for me.
Do you think that you mentioned your parents' generation versus our generation, and we could probably say this about the generation now with our kids.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that perhaps it's almost from a generational standpoint, we've become more open-minded and needing to do that just to survive because the pace of change has accelerated over the years? Our parents' generation could go work for GE, like my father did for 30 years, or IBM for 30 years. And they obviously their careers evolved over that time, but that's almost unheard of today that anyone would work for the same company for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're not keeping up, I mean, you're going to get left behind. And I think for our kids, it's just a part of them that what's the next thing to do? So you think it's society that is kind of making people kind of just adapt more quickly?
I think so. I think things are definitely changing at a faster pace than they used to. It used to be that, if you were a doctor, lawyer, dentist, you basically had it made. You were set for life, and you didn't have to worry about your finances or anything like that. And I don't know if there are that many careers that are that airtight right now. And even a number of the doctors that I know are not doing incredibly well, or as well as my dad and his friends, who are all doctors, did. It's not as a secure and safe a world as it used to be. Like you said, it used to be, you get hired by IBM, and 50 years later you get the gold watch and you retire with a nice pension. And that's just not the world that we live in. But I think that some of it is generational, and the pace of change has definitely increased. I also think that as we age, we become a little bit more set in our ways, and we're not, because the pace of change is always increasing and getting faster and faster. I do think it's as we get older, we don't become accustomed. We're not accustomed to that speed catching up to us. And I know when I talk to my parents, they are very much against change. There are times where I will tell them, you need to change your phone company, you need to change your cable company, just because they're just not doing. My parents had a satellite provider that had argued with all kinds of TV stations, and so my father wasn't able to watch the Braves games, the Falcons games, and that's all he really cares about. But
Right.
Yet they stuck with that provider because they didn't want to change. And it wasn't until I came in and basically forced their hand and told them, you have to do this, you're driving me crazy, that they were willing to make that change. So I do think that it just gets to a point where you resist any form of change, and that's unfortunate.
So if that's kind of true, that as we get older, we tend to resist that change. And, for a lot of us, and certainly, we're still, in my opinion, we're still relatively young, late 40s,
Mm-hmm.
early 50s, that's still a lot of time left. Okay. And,
Mm-hmm.
I I think it certainly, we are too young to be thinking about being too resistant to change. How how do you, and you can look through your entire career through this, how do you kind of, protect against, um, going against those changes and being resistant? I mean, is there anything you're doing from like a learning perspective? How do you keep it going to make sure you're staying as fresh as possible?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. The company I work with now, I manage corporate communications, and at my employer, that means public relations, some analyst relations, some investor relations, social media, um, internal communications, et cetera. And so, as you know, most of my primary background is as a PR person, and I've learned quite a bit about these other areas since I joined my company. But there's much for me to learn, and even with PR, there's a lot. It's always adapting, and there's a lot to learn. And so I've always fostered a culture within my team that we all teach and learn from each other. And any idea could be a good idea. And my philosophy from the get-go in marketing has always been that a good marketer identifies where the market is, where the audience is, and then you go where that market is and you communicate with them in whatever way they want to be communicated with. And that has evolved, right? It used to be that the market was reading the tech publications, the PC Worlds of the world, and PC Magazine and things like that. That's not necessarily the case any longer. And today's market is reading social media. They're reading message boards. They're reading Reddit. All these new tools, all these new areas that are available to us, and you've got to keep up with that. And so it's just a matter of, my basic philosophy hasn't changed. I'm going to meet my market wherever they are. Is where the market has changed over the years. And so it's the same fundamental approach. It's just keeping up with the market changes.
So it's so funny that you brought that up about instilling that from a cultural perspective with your team, because that's actually was one of my questions that I had prepared for you. Talk a little bit more about that, because first off, how have you adopted sort of this continuously learning model for yourself, and how do you prioritize what you should learn? I mean, one of the things that's a blessing, but also a curse of the kind of the information age that we're in, is that we can get access to everything, but we can get access to everything. Like, how do you decide what you should learn? You rattled off some things. So for example, I'm obviously familiar with Reddit, and I'll throw out another one for you, is Quora. Both of those things that I have some exposure to, but by no means am I an expert in either of those.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be challenging right now for me to think like which one I should prioritize. And there's numerous other potential, I would call them sub channels beyond, secondary to the primary social media channels like LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and even, Snapchat. How do you sift through all of this information and determine where you should focus?
Yeah, early on, my philosophy has always been hire good people and let them do their thing. And by good people, one of the challenges is you can't hire people that are just like you, right? You have to, a diverse group is a strong group. And by people bringing in other backgrounds, other things that they've done, it strengthens your team. And so, for example, I have people on my team who have, managed social media campaigns, but, and I've done a fair amount of social media, but I haven't done much paid social media. Mm-hmm. And so the person on my team who I brought on is particularly strong in that. And she's had some early successes there that are frankly things that I wouldn't have been able to pull off on my own, because I don't have experience in that area. So it's having the courage and the ability to say, I don't know everything. I don't know what I don't know, and letting people try out things that they've been successful with in the past.
And how do you also handle, I mean, I know you well, so I sense that you would already do this, but I assume there's a number of people out there probably wondering, how do you try new things without the risk of failing? Do
Mhm.
you, is it okay for your team to fit, try and
Mhm.
have little failures? I mean, how do you put that into your culture?
Well, my employer today is a publicly traded company, so we can't have huge failures. We have to be able to support our shareholders and do the right things. But you can't be afraid of failing as well. You have to be willing to try new things, and part of it is whenever we undertake a project like this, we have to set the goals, the potential ROIs, the costs, and then we take a calculated decision on how much of a risk are we willing to take, how much is there a way to do a pilot of the program that if it fails or if it doesn't go well, that we can just dip our toe in the water and not do ourselves too much damage. There are all kinds of things that you can do. I think the biggest danger is to not try. And so I encourage people, and I tell everybody on my team, yes, overall as a company, we are conservative. We don't try every crazy thing that we want to try, but if we can make a case for it, and I think most technology companies are run by engineers and executives that respect numbers, and if you can build a numbers case for something, I think you have a strong chance of getting it pushed through.
So I think that's great, Rick. I think that a lot of people would want to work for you. I think that, yeah, with having, especially at a public company like that. I mean, certainly it's, obviously if you're putting out a press release for a public company, there is no room for error. But there's
Mhm.
also, a tried and true way of doing that. That it's in itself has not changed drastically, especially for if you were putting your earnings release out. I mean, it's pretty standard from the same way it's been going on for many, many years. But my sense is that there's a lot of people out there working, and they're working for bosses who don't have that um, level of flexibility.
Mhm.
And I think that one of the things I found is that you do gain a lot of education when you do make mistakes and fail at things, especially if you're failing at something that's
Mhm.
new and cutting edge. And really, a lot of that is about building resilience. How have you? Do you have any examples of either yourself or your team members where you've seen that resilience kind of strengthen them in terms of how they've been able to move forward and have greater success down the line?
I think the key is to learn from your mistakes and be able to adapt to it. One of the common terms is fail fast, and people tend to do that all the time. I think it's mostly a matter of when you take risk, you have to be prepared. Risk by its nature involves some possibility of failure, and so it's more of an attitude of um, are you willing to take that risk? And like you say, in some areas from a publicly held company, you cannot afford to take any risk.
Right.
But in the areas that you can, it's acknowledging that that risk is there. It's acknowledging that there is a possibility of a failure, and then be willing to take the good with the bad.
So I want to shift gears for a second, just from your career perspective. For a long time, you were working independently, either with other PR firms or independently as a PR consultant, where you were
Mhm.
driving your own business and you might have been working with some partners. And then you obviously decided to go back and really, I think for the first time in your career, go in-house to a corporation rather than
Mhm.
working for an agency.
Mhm.
What was that like? I'm curious to know how you adjusted to that. Not only from, talk about both from going from being kind of independent on your own to working for somebody again, but also working for a corporation for the first time, kind of mid-career. What was that? What was that experience like?
Yeah, it's funny. As you said, for most of my career, I've been fortunate to have a very flexible work schedule. I've worked from home for most of my career and worked with a number of companies out on the West Coast, and was able to make it work for for decades, and always had been on the agency side. But I always had a curiosity of what it was like on the other side of the fence in-house and working with a company. You know, it's interesting. My nature, I'm naturally a pretty conservative person, and so the agency life has a lot of peaks and valleys, and the independent contractor life has a lot of peaks and valleys that I don't necessarily enjoy. I like having more stability. It's just my personality. It's my nature. And so despite the fact that I did it later in my career, I was at a point in my life where my sons were in college, and we were, you know, in that period where we frankly weren't going on very many vacations. I wasn't leveraging a lot of that flexibility and freedom that I had from my previous work life. And so I said, you know, this opportunity presented itself, and I said, if I'm ever going to do it, and I've always had this curiosity, now is the time to do it. And frankly, it's been a great change for me, because it just kind of fits my personality better than the kind of Wild West consultant lifestyle that I was living before.
So that's an interesting point. Did you and I've never asked you this, before you decided to take this role a few years ago, did you consider a full-time role at an agency? Did that, or were you pretty much set on, I'm going to continue doing this independently, or I'm going to look for an in-house role at a corporation? Because knowing that you had the peaks and valleys, both as a contractor and as, you know, working in agencies, was that ever a consideration to go back to work for an agency?
It was. I will say it wasn't very appealing to me, because I had kind of been there, done that before, and there wasn't much excitement in doing that for me. It just would have been going back and using a bunch of old muscles that I hadn't flexed before. So I knew I could do it. I knew that was a possibility. It was a very safe option for me, in that I had done that before. I was much more intrigued by this option because it wasn't something that I had done before. I knew that there were going to be some things that I liked about it. There were some things that I didn't like about it. You know, for example, I wasn't accustomed to the bureaucracy and some of the paperwork that's involved with working for a large company. But it doesn't. Again, it doesn't go against my nature. I'm a pretty organized person as it is, and I'm pretty, you know, having that structure is something that I actually embraced. It didn't bother me. You know, the other thing is that I actually was looking forward to going into an office. You know, something that a lot of people hate is having to wake up early and drive into an office. And I was the opposite. I had been working from home for decades, and I was looking forward to being in an office full of people and, you know, having water cooler talk and experiencing all that stuff that I hadn't been
Right.
part of before. And so I saw it more as a plus, an opportunity to do something that I hadn't had a chance to do. And I've definitely enjoyed that part of it.
Well, and I think the fact that you appreciate the stability of it as well, you
Yeah.
know, knowing that you know, one of the things is, you know, I've done a lot of buyer interviews over the past several years, and really digging into how buyers buy my clients, you know, software or products and services. And I think with adapting to changes, it's important to know how your buyers buy. So like if you're coaching a team, being able to
Mhm.
understand what motivates them to be able to help them adapt to changes. But it also goes to knowing yourself as a buyer. And,
Mhm.
you know, just the way, this is what I heard when you were talking, is that you went through kind of your own buyer interview when you were making that decision. You saw that you could go back to an agency, but, you know, that was something that you had done before, and it would have been
Mhm.
okay. But you saw this greater opportunity. You also knew that it aligned with kind of your purpose and your philosophy.
Mhm.
I think that's something that a lot of people would benefit from when they are, you know, potentially, because this was a change that you decided to do on your own. And there's really, you know, many changes happen to people, you know, but
Mhm.
we all take proactive changes. We decide to take a new job. We decide to do something new. And, you know, this has clearly worked out for you. But I think part of the reason it's worked out for you is that you knew yourself.
Yeah.
You knew that, yeah, there's a risk of doing this, but you knew that this is something that really fit into your area of interest, your area of expertise, and your comfort level of being able to be successful.
Absolutely. You know, and the agency thing is always going to be there, right? If I wanted to, I could always go back to that. It's just there were, you know, number of options, and I decided to take the bigger change just because it was more intriguing to me and more exciting to me. The safe thing would have been to pursue something agency wise because it's what I knew, but sometimes the safe thing isn't always what is going to pull the best out of you. And in this case, I think I wound up in a place where I'm much happier, much more content. And to be honest, from what I learned about myself, I think I would be more intrigued by going to another in-house gig over an agency. I think I enjoy this lifestyle more than the agency life, but you never know.
Why is that? Why do you think you enjoy it more? What has been more enjoyable to you for it?
I just think just the consistency of it, the fact that you have more time to really learn about your company and really try a lot of things. You know, one of the things that I really enjoy about my job is that I'm not just doing PR. If I had gone to an agency, I'd just be doing PR. And I'm one of those people that I've always felt that if you aren't learning, you aren't growing. And I always want to be moving forward. You know, it's funny. My sons will catch me watching the History Channel or something on TV, and they'll look at me and they'll say, "Why are you doing that? Like, you know, you don't have to go to school anymore. Why would you ever want to learn about, you know, about this?" And I've always just had that attitude that it's important to learn, it's important to grow. And one of the things that I legitimately love about my job is that I am able to do all of these things. I'm learning a lot about what it's like to communicate with a large employee population and do it across time zone, across countries, you know, across continents. And you know, so learning about that, learning more about social media, learning about organic social media versus paid and all this stuff. It's something that I'm able to do much more of than if I had gone what I consider to be the safe route and just continue to work in PR with a PR agency. It would have been the safe thing, but I wouldn't have learned as much as I'm learning today.
Well, you've really validated that comment about just continuously learning. I mean, I'm just a fundamental believer that if you want to be proactive and be ready to be able to face and adapt to changes, you have to be continuously learning. You have to be, you know, as Wayne Gretzky said, sort of skating to where the puck's going,
Yeah.
and looking ahead. The one thing, you know, having been on both sides of the fence, you know, basically consulting or being in an agency at the beginning of my career and at my time now and in the middle, so that basically 13 years, so it's almost exactly half of my career has been in working in-house at two different companies. The one thing I really did like about working for companies is that you could go deep into you know, into their offerings, into your target audience. And while that was always changing, we were expanding our target audiences. We were expanding the number of the types of buyers that we had in both companies that I worked for. But you obviously, the one thing you have to be considerate of, you have to like that because you're all in on that particular company at that time, versus an agency, you're spread across different clients. So you might be like liking three of them more than you like another one. And you might want to, you know, try to go deeper there. But it's hard to go deep when you're in an agency. You just don't have the bandwidth to be able to do that. And that was always exciting to me about really getting to know, you really get to know your customers. And for you, you know, especially you're getting to know customers from not only your company's perspective, but your internal customers, from an internal communication standpoint across the globe. And that's something that is, well, there's some internal communication, certainly in an agency. It's very different than what you're doing, you know, from a corporation standpoint.
Yeah, I also like the fact that the buck stops with you really on the corporate side. So when you're at an agency, there's a lot that you can accomplish, but at the end of the day, if the client doesn't come through with the customers or the spokespeople or the messaging, it can be tough for you to do your job. Whereas being in-house, you have more responsibility and more ability to affect that change. If you see something that needs to be fixed, you're the one who's probably going to fix it.
So two last questions, and then I'll let you go and we'll wrap up. One is that from a learning standpoint, and you mentioned the History Channel, which may be more personal learning than it is professional. Where is your go-to source for learning? I mean, where do you spend your time? Is it reading? Is it listening to podcasts? Is it watching YouTube videos? Where do you really like to spend time trying to learn? From a business standpoint.
From a business standpoint, a lot of it is through my colleagues, to be honest, and their experiences and their background, and their thoughts and what's worked for them in the past. And then a lot of it is on the internet and researching and seeing how other people have done it and what's worked well, what hasn't worked well, and evaluating the things that I see. I mean, it's interesting right now with the pandemic, we're seeing companies have to adapt their communications methods and go virtual with a lot of these things. And so a lot of these things are happening on the fly, and it's incredible when you see the quick evolution of some of these things. I remember when the pandemic first hit and a lot of these conferences and a lot of these announcements were virtual, they were pretty rough, to be honest, at the beginning. But now you look at Apple's, for example, Apple's recent announcements of the iPhones and their devices, and they almost look like Hollywood movies. I mean, they're just so well produced and well done. And we're talking about something that has taken 8 or 9 months of evolution, but it's really gone from nothing to this very polished state very quickly. And so part of that is just keeping up with things and seeing how other companies are doing things and learning from each other. And that's what everybody's doing. They're just keeping tabs on everybody else and trying to learn from their mistakes, get a little bit better each and every time.
So lastly, as you kind of look back, at your career and how you've evolved, are there any other thoughts or tips that you would have for people as they're, going through their career, who are perhaps going through even more rapid change than we did, through the last 20 years? I think the next 10 years will likely have much more rapid change than we've even had the last 10 years. What suggestions do you have for them to help them adapt to changes in their careers as they go forward?
I would say that don't be afraid to learn from people that are younger than you. A lot of the changes that we're seeing are just fundamental changes in technology, in perspectives. And one thing that we're seeing in the world in general right now is a rapidly changing perspective on how we view each other. And it's being driven by a younger generation. And so I talk to my sons. I have two 20-something-year-old sons that give me their perspective, and I find fascinating. And you have to be willing to learn from that, right? Not every generation has all the answers. And so in work and in life, I'm always willing to learn from people that are older and younger than me. And it's just all a matter of perspective and learning, what somebody thinks, as opposed to, these aren't black and white issues that we're dealing with. It's just shades of gray.
Well, that's great counsel. And one thing that what you just said really demonstrates is you're having humility. You're recognizing that you do not have all the answers and you don't know everything. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that we both have come across people in our careers where they have lacked that humility. And I think that they've ultimately have made mistakes, or not progressed as far, later, because they weren't necessarily willing to learn from younger people and new ideas. And I think, being willing to admit that and wanting to learn from younger people, I think, is a great point and a great takeaway from this conversation.
Yeah, frankly, as you talk about, a lot of the change is being generated by younger people younger than us. And so, that population is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So you can fight the change or you can embrace it. And I choose to embrace it.
Absolutely. You couldn't have ended on a better point. You can fight the change or embrace it. That's great, Rick. Well, listen, Rick, thanks so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
All right, no problem.
Well, once again, this has been another edition of Adapt2Changes interview series. I'm Bret Rachlin, and I'll see you next time.